This is John Schwabish from policyviz.com coming to you with another data visualization critique, this one of the upshot in the New York Times about small businesses surging in black communities around the United States. Asking the question, was it the stimulus from the federal government? This is a really nice piece from Quoc Trung Bui, who I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Let's take a look here. We're going to start with business registrations in New York State. And so what you got here is your basic line chart, right? It's static, which I'm always a big fan of. If you can resist the urge to make everything interactive, I think that's a nice way to do it. And so let's just take a look at some of what I think are some nice approaches here. So first off, the gray background in this visualization, it's just a very light gray, sets this line chart off from the rest of the page. And it's not so heavy that it, sort of overwhelms the reader. It's just very subtle. And also notice that the top grid line here is 4,000. I also really like this little approach that they're doing lately, is putting the number on top of the grid line. It's like really blends the entire graph together. So it's not like a specific y-axis area. It's just within the graph itself. And notice that they don't even extend this all the way up to 5,000. They don't really need to. I mean, it's clear, right, that the end of this, these three areas here, these three humps, are above 4,000. So why do we actually need to round to 5,000? Is that going to help us see the data less clearly or more clearly if we raise it? I don't think we do. And then again, just notice Time's so good at annotation. First stimulus, right? You can see that dashed line there. Second, third. They don't even repeat the word stimulus, right? You don't need it. We already know it's a stimulus. So they've made that really clear in this visualization. On the x-axis, again, a little bit of a thicker grid line so that you see that it's at the bottom. January 2019, January 2020, July 2020, January 2021, and April 2021. Would this benefit from a July over here? I feel personally like it would just be balanced a little bit more. I mean, it's a super minor comment, but I just feel like we get a little more balance if we added that little piece there. It's not necessary, obviously, but I would love to see it. But now let's move down a little bit. Now we understand the graph. It's obviously a simple graph to read, but now let's go down a little bit further and see what they've done for a few other states. So we've got several other states here, as you can see. I scroll down: Washington, Vermont, Texas, Kentucky, Georgia, and Florida. Now, again, they're just going to repeat that graph. The y-axis is going to differ here for each of these different states, but that's, of course, partly, mostly because we have, or entirely because we have different population sizes in these different states. So now, could this have gone per capita? Yeah, if that's really what we're focusing on. It's not really clear that's what's important to compare across the states, but to see this trend right after each of these stimulus packages went out, and to see how much the trends in business registrations were affected by after around those stimulus changes. So now you can see here that they've simplified the x-axis label. It's no longer adding months. It's just the 3 years for 2019, 2021. And they've been careful to line up these dashed lines all the way down this entire column. So they're all lined up really nicely. Really nice use of small multiples. Remember, if you've never used small multiples, really think hard about whether you would need to have that complex graph that you have with all the lines sitting on it at one time, or whether you could do a better job of just breaking up that graph into multiple parts. And this is one way in which they do that. Let's scroll down a little bit further. We've got a few maps down here. Now, interestingly, these maps are interactive, which I was actually surprised to see on this piece. I was a little surprised to see there's an interactive map here when the line charts above were not interactive. But okay. But just thought it was kind of interesting that all of a sudden there's an interactivity here. And we've got a nice little yellow outline around zip codes that have where the percentage of people identify as Black or African American make up more than 50% of the population. So we can see this area down here in Queens, and this area over here as well. I guess this is Brooklyn over here and Queens over here. And what I think has one of the sort of standard color palettes of the Times, purple to green. Now they're using a diverging color palette here. And when you use a diverging color palette, I think it's really important to mark the center piece, or the midpoint. Now they're not using a midpoint here, but they're obviously differentiating between negatives, which are in purple, and then the positive, which are in green. So you just want to make that midpoint clear if you're using a diverging color palette like this. And I also am curious about using this particular ramp the way they did it, or the labels here, because this is plus 20% and then plus 52% relative to minus 15%. So that's kind of an interesting decision that they use. Like, why isn't this negative 20%, or why isn't this plus 15%? So that's an interesting question I have about this visualization. I don't think it affects my overall view of the data. It's just, as you dive in and think a little bit more detailed about some of these things, you start to ask these questions. Notice here, so we go down to Atlanta, everything is positive. And so we're going to go plus 26, plus 53, plus 90, plus 135. So again, the changing on the labels here is kind of interesting, but a good, nice interactive map, pretty simple. Like, you can't really do anything with the clicking. It just brings up new information, which is nice. I don't know how many people actually click on these maps and play around, but okay, it's here. Now, notice there is a purple here. Purple, purple, purple. It's not labeled up here. Is it necessary to label it? I mean, if it's a static visualization, yeah. If it's interactive, you've got the change right there in the box. I guess it would have been useful to have that, but they kind of left it off there. So let's see what else we've got down here. Houston, just the greens, negative 33%, negative 38%. Let's just take a look one more thing. I'm just noticing now. This is negative 33%. Notice that shade of purple. Let's go back up to Atlanta. Negative 31% is a much darker purple. So these maps are clearly not intended to be compared across the cities. They're independent, which is fine. I think there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe adding this purple color up to the legend. Again, the legend differs in the increments within this map itself, and then obviously across the other maps. So that's the last of the visualizations here. It's a really interesting story. I encourage you to read it. So we've got some interactive maps, and my favorite part is the small multiple line charts, which I think is my big takeaway. Anytime I have maybe even just a line chart with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines on it, I might just break it up into small multiples. Easier to read, maybe a little bit easier to annotate, a little bit easier to spot particular patterns. So this is John Schwabish from PolicyViz.com. Please come back for more critiques on this playlist.